we are, Renee, in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Oh my gosh, I cannot say I'd ever thought I'd be on the Alabama campus.
Rolling Tide.
Roll Tide roll. What else can you say?
I don't know. I don't
That
know.
pretty much is the town.
Yeah,
Oh
that's
my gosh.
all that's
I
here.
I guess I had a very different opinion of what the town would look like, especially like what the campus would look like. I thought there'd be more fanfare, more showy because of all their national championships, and it's really not. It's kind of down to earth, a lot more
Well,
than I expected.
it's so uniform. The buildings
Oh my
are
gosh.
all the same, and they're well manicured. Like the lawns are beautiful. The landscaping's gorgeous.
Beautiful. Everybody's behaving. They're acting
It's
appropriately. It's an amazing.
we went over for breakfast this morning at like 8, and everyone's uniformly walking to class. It
Who's
was
going to
really,
class? Really?
and people look well put together. I know it's early in the semester, but
Yeah.
amazing just how nice it is around here. Just
Right.
really is a nice campus.
Well, today we have a really interesting podcast for you. We got to see Johnny Manziel, and for those of you that don't know who Johnny Manziel is, we'll fill you in. But it was amazing. He's now on a tour speaking called "Weight of Great," and amazing. And it ties in with our substance use month we just wound up this last month, talking about recovery month. And so we're gonna have a great conversation today. Before we get started, what's happening on the farm while you're in Alabama?
Well, I think right before I left to come to Alabama, my internet was too slow on the farm.
Uh,
And so, we added more technology for the grain bins and everything. So I had to up my internet speed. I found out I was on a legacy internet. So I had fiber at the farm, and apparently they were throttling me. So now I was able to increase to 100 meg up and down. So we might be podcasting from the farm all fall and winter long because I've got better internet there than I do anywhere else.
Oh man, we're gonna have to fix it in my house. You better what happened there because that's a mess. All right. So today we're going to talk about Johnny Manziel. And I think we're going to start off with talking about his background and kind of why he's an important character. So, for those of you that don't know Johnny Manziel, most people think of him as sort of a flash in the pan, a big crash and burn. He has a Netflix show out that you can hear all about it. But he was a star quarterback football player. And what's fascinating about him being in Tuscaloosa is part of his history. So, for those that don't know, he was a quarterback. He was kind of it wasn't like a standout stellar star in high school, but when he got to college, he went to Texas A&M and he basically walked onto the field and became great. And we know the rest of his story. He started using substances way back when, at like a really young age, and did all of this while using substances that people didn't know. So he was using drugs throughout his career. And then he goes on to talk about mental health. And we're going to weave about all of that story today. So to get us kicked off, let's talk about Johnny Manziel and who he is. So he came on the scene as a football player, quarterback, and in Tuscaloosa was when his fame began. He credits Tuscaloosa. So Texas A&M in 2012 came into Alabama, who was ranked number one, and then Johnny led them to a victory. He
Yeah.
had over 350 some yards of the total 400 yards of offense, which is just crazy, and two offensive touchdowns to beat Alabama at home, ranked number one. And he said he walked away from that day famous. Everybody knew who he was, and it became the beginning of his fame, which is what he always wanted. He always wanted to make money, and he always wanted to be famous, and he wanted to be good at football. So he got everything he wanted starting on that day. But let's talk a minute about him coming and talking. We took questions from the audience. Wasn't that fun about the
Oh,
people that
you,
remembered the game?
you can't believe how many people got up for Q&A and said, you know what, Johnny, I was there that day. I remember that game like it was yesterday. Right. And so that it was a pinnacle moment, right? Not just, we think about fans, we think about the athletes we put up on a pedestal. And a lot of so many athletes are worshipped, right? They come in and they have that amazing game, and it changes the trajectory of it changed Texas A&M.
Yeah.
It changed Johnny personally. He won everything in 2012. The Heisman, all of the awards. He came out of 2012, just a superstar. But we don't always realize what's behind
No.
all of that stardom, right? We see that so much anymore now that college athletes, the NIL, that they get paid more and more. Johnny, right? He made millions early on in his career, and that wasn't necessarily good for him.
No. And so when Johnny was in college, you didn't have the NIL, which is name, image, and likeness for those
Right.
that don't know. And now college players have to be paid for they're using their face and their image in college football. But back then, they could use his image. Texas A&M was making millions of dollars off of his face because of
Mhm.
his celebrity status, and he made nothing. So he and a buddy decided to start doing autographs,
Right.
which is illegal. But he made the buddy sort of the manager that kind of ran it so that Johnny was sort of one step removed and started getting paid.
Yep.
And then when he started getting paid, he realized then he started to party even harder. And then he was addicted to gambling. There's a lot of pieces to this story. But at the same time, while he's doing all of that, he won Heisman Trophy, the Davy O'Brien Award, the Manning Award, the AP College Football Player of the Year Award, and several others all at the same time. So in his mind, he could do it all.
Right.
He could take those drugs, do whatever he was doing because he won everything while doing it. So there was no downside for him
Right.
during that season.
Right.
And so he did everything. And so when he came out then of college, because he won the Heisman as a freshman, no less,
Right.
which is unheard of. And so he comes out of college and he goes into the NFL. And this is where his story begins. And he calls it his season of gray.
Right.
Back now. He didn't know what it was then, but he had all of it: money, fame, fortune. He got a big contract to work in Cleveland and hated it.
Yeah. He talks about going to the Browns, and being in Cleveland and sitting, in his condo, in his penthouse alone.
Yeah.
For most of it, right? Like just recluse, trying to get away from the fame, trying to escape every day. And obviously that's not possible for someone with his fame and abilities, yet he was so tormented through that entire period of time.
Yeah, he talks about in 2015. So all his fame was in 2012, 2013. So 2015, he's in the NFL, and he remembers taking the first suicide attempt.
Right.
Took a whole lot of pills and just tried to not wake up the next day, and that didn't work. He woke back up. So he goes to rehab for the first time. But the thoughts in his mind were, am I really never going to be able to drink again? And he said immediately he took 90 days or something to take care of himself. He got sent to Pennsylvania.
Right.
And then
Reading, I think it was Reading, PA. I was paying attention. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then after his 90 days, he immediately said he went right back to the same people and right back to drinking and drugging. So it's just like that 90 days never happened. He just went right back to
Which is so common, right? We know that so oftentimes treatment the first round, isn't effective, or, Johnny wasn't at a place where he was ready to take that all in. And he understood the 12 steps, right? He's very much foundationally set today in the 12 steps. And, hearing kind of Johnny reflecting on that time of his life and the pain that he was going through, reminds us of how difficult recovery can be.
Right. So what Johnny, well, his story goes on that said he tried to kill himself a second time.
Right.
And had the gun, but somehow it just didn't go off. And then he ended up in treatment again, realized I need more help again. And so treatment has started for him a couple of times back then and is now ongoing. We'll talk more about that in a second. He continues. But he, the first time, went in to learn about substances. But the second time he went in for treatment, he started talking about maybe he should think about mental health and learning more about that. And he learned he has bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
And doesn't that match like the story?
Absolutely.
Watch the Netflix show about them. We'll talk about, man, bipolar makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And, and I think that it's so powerful now to hear him reflect and talk about, this is what was really going on with me. And, remember, Johnny today is 31 years old.
Yeah.
And so it's taken him up until today to get to the place where he can really articulate, this is where I was at. Right. Because, Johnny was so motivated to continue to play football. And even up until recently, he was still trying to make a go of it at the Canadian football leagues. Right. But, I think finally he got to the place of realizing, what do I need to do? Right. And we have to remember that Johnny did have a lot of privilege. Right. Like he comes from a family that provided him a whole lot of supports and a whole lot of options for treatment that most people aren't going to have access to. And the struggle ongoing that really tormented the whole family as he moved through the different stages of his life and his different stages of his recovery.
Right. And so part of what we watched not only was his talk, but then they did a question and answer period. And people would say, what would you tell young athletes? What would you tell them? And one of his big messages is that social media is a trap. It's not real.
Right.
So you only see, we always talk about this. You only see that people don't even know what these are anymore. But back in the day, there were records. The A side was the good side. You flip
Wow.
over and it's
This is a callback. Yeah, go on.
so we always talk about social media. You only see the A side. You only
It's
see that.
true.
You only see the greatest hits, the top 10.
Right.
Nobody shows you how bad the rest of your life is. And so, for people that are athletes that are aspiring to be great, they don't show the workouts that didn't work or the days that you didn't feel well. You only see their best times and their best lifts and their best whatever. So he was saying, make sure young athletes know that that's just a trap, and it's not. That's not the way the world works.
And at what age does this start, right? I mean, Johnny went back and, he said it was at 15
Yeah.
that I started abusing substances. It was 15 that I was searching for the next high, right? So this is not this whole time that Johnny was being successful and doing that behind the scenes, he was still using, he was still trying to self-medicate. All of the things were happening, right? And so, how difficult it is for folks to are having to put on both sides, right? Put on the face when they go out in public, right? And manage that. And when we think about the pressures of social media, I can tell you, I love going on vacation and taking a selfie and putting it on, but that's not necessarily representational of the whole trip, right? You get one good picture, but that doesn't always represent all the ups and downs that occur. And so, I think it does lend itself to some honest conversations about reasonable expectations, especially of the young athletes. I think about Caitlin Clark. I think about other athletes who have been just propelled so quickly into the spotlight, and how much pressure and what really has to happen behind the scenes. And some athletes can manage that really well. I think Johnny does a nice job of talking about some of these kids come out of high school and they make that they can adapt, and they can still keep up on their studies and do it. And he goes, there's some kids that just fall apart. And what do we really do to support all kids across the board?
Well, and with one of the things he said that made so much sense is just the types of kids that all end up like in a college football team
Right.
come from all various backgrounds. There's another Netflix show called Swamp Kings, all about Urban Meyer and the time that Tim Tebow was the lead quarterback of the Florida team. And Tim Tebow came from 100% homeschool life into professional fame. And Tim Tebow today is still a successful person, but the life that he lived. And so there's some really great documentaries out there now to show you just the pressure of these guys are under. These guys, when he's a college quarterback, he's 19, 20, 21 years old, and the weight of the whole world to be the best on their shoulders. And we don't think about that. And one of the conversations also kept happening with questions was how much more pressure, because they were talking, a lady was chatting about how her kids now are, 7th and 8th grade asking to play top varsity teams with 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. So one of the things Johnny said was they need to understand that drugs and alcohol, if you're trying to be a great athlete, should have no part of your life. And he's not wrong.
Right.
So you think about somebody like a Tom Brady who had just a very clean, healthy diet for all that time to get to 40 years old.
Right.
Tom Brady is a lightweight when it comes to alcohol. If you ever watched him celebrate after a victory, you would see this. But the reason is because that's not part of his. It can't be have his body to do what it does. So they're trying to say, hey, make sure kids understand that. And Johnny's saying that, alcohol and drugs didn't help me with longevity, didn't help me stay in the game, didn't help me do good things. And so, really pushing that on athletes is really important. But we've talked about this, about our substance abuse series, how that's countercultural.
Right.
Football games equals beer.
Right.
And so it's countercultural, where the culture, everybody in the stands are drinking a lot, but you, the football player, should be drinking or using drugs.
Right.
That's going to be a tough sell for kids.
It absolutely is, and I think that's part of the challenge. And I think as we step back and think about how Johnny's taken the risks to start sharing his story, we both talked about, it's pretty obvious he's really young in starting to share his story. He hasn't shared it very much, and I think it just takes so much courage for folks in the spotlight to be able to come forward and really share those stories of hope. And I think that's part of having this conversation about alcohol and alcohol on campuses as well, is that he's willing to step up and start sharing about his personal story, going back to his youth and the influences he had. And then when he was pressed onto teams, that he was the youngest one there, and then the pressures that were put on him because of that. And I think that's partly what makes this kind of so special is someone younger coming back to a college campus and having an impact. I don't think we talked about it yet, but after we saw him speak, he came back that night to speak on campus, in the same venue, and we stopped over there to see. And after he was done, the line was all the way down the venue we were at for college kids. It looks like a lot of freshmen and sophomores there to get their picture taken with Johnny, right? He's still a pinnacle. And we're in Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and they still wanted his picture with Johnny.
The money.
Yeah, he's still doing the money thing. It was absolutely, amazing to see that his story resonated with the college students, right? And so what a better way to reach that audience.
Well, and what I think is really cool about that, if the pinnacle of his football career kicked off in Tuscaloosa, and this is really the beginning of his speaking career back to Tuscaloosa, I think that's brilliant. And one of the things we haven't talked about either is he has a therapist that came along with on the journey, and she was fantastic. I think they should like team teach on this.
It was amazing. During question and answers, there was a question about, what do you do for yourself? Are you going to therapy? How do you maintain your sobriety and stay on track? And he goes, well, I brought my therapist with me here today, which is amazing in the first part. And they walked over and handed the therapist the microphone. And it was like, wow, this is interesting. What's going to happen now? She was the most amazing person I have ever heard speak. Was it not amazing? She didn't say very much, but what she said, I hung on every word.
I did too. And so one of the things I wrote down that she said was, you can measure your willingness by being in the space of your contradictions.
Yes.
You measure your wellness by being in the space of your contradictions. And so you put that in your brain. It's like being well is the contradiction of what you say you do versus what you do. I call that your say-do ratio. So we're on the same page.
Right.
But people say they're well. And again, this is the Instagram story, the whatever. I'm up. I do these up with the moon working out. I actually literally do. But it's not maybe every day or whatever, but I don't put, I'm laying in bed on Tuesday because I hurt from yesterday's workout.
Right.
And so, that doesn't.
I don't see that post. I only see the post when you're pointing at the moon.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
So that's exactly a good point. Yeah. So it's between the life of your wellness is between your contradictions. So if you're saying you're eating well, but you're out binge drinking at night, whatever. So she was really landing on, the contradiction. The other thing that I loved about her, she realizes he is a rebel by nature.
Right.
And I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
I want to know where the line is when you tell me I can't do something. I want it in code,
Push it.
in policy. Yep. No, I just want to know exactly what you mean when I say I can't. Okay. Well, what can I not do? Just tell me. And so he's like that too. And so for him, he had to make some choices to be healthy because he naturally bent unhealthy. And so for her, she was really talking about like how you have to deal with that. They know what to do. You can't tell them what to do. Yep. So she's more of a coach for him.
Well, it went back and she corrected it. She said, I'm not your therapist. I'm your coach.
That's right.
She's like, I'm here to help you to be the best you can be. And the only way I can do that is by coaching you.
Yeah.
Right. And by helping you to see what you need to do and move forward. It was
challenged him to a push-up contest.
He did.
He's going to win. So
and she would have won. And
they do it together.
Yeah.
So that's where the coach part comes in. So instead of the therapist where you can't be friends and you're all official, he needed somebody that would do life with him.
Right.
And he's found this wonderful lady that she's like, I love you forever. And she helped him breathe to get on stage because he was super nervous.
Oh, it was hilarious. She called him out. Like, this is toward the end of when she's talking. She goes, and early on, I was breathing for you, Johnny, because he was tense. He was tight when he first started speaking.
Totally new for him.
Totally new for him. And he was very poised. Like, excellent. Don't get me wrong. Excellent. He's going to be an amazing public speaker. Absolutely amazing. If you have a chance to go see him, 100% recommend you see him in whatever venue you can go to hear his inspirational story firsthand, because it's worth it.
He's still struggling too he wants it to be a positive message, but he realizes he did some really bad stuff.
Right.
So trying to figure out like how much to say, not to glorify the stupid that he did. And he did a lot of stupid. And the Netflix show, before I forget to tell you, is called Untold.
Right.
Johnny Football. And Untold is always an awesome series on Netflix, but Johnny Football is who he was and his little money. And it goes into his gambling and his drinking and his drugging and just all the things. And so he's trying to not glamorize that, but yet tell enough of it. Because he is 31. So these guys are little people. So some of these guys don't really remember him to this already. Right. So he's going to have to figure out that balance. And I think he's due to that conversation. The other thing I loved by the therapist coach, she said, don't say the word coping.
Yeah, she
She's
did.
like,
Yeah.
we're not just trying to cope in life, we're trying to thrive.
Right.
It's not enough just to get through. You want to
Right.
thrive. So she goes, don't say that anymore. You're not coping.
Right.
You're working on thriving.
Coping just gets you by. Like, really, she just took the stance of coping gets you by, but it doesn't move you forward, right? If we all want to thrive and move forward and be our best selves, quit coping because that's not getting you anywhere. And boy, that was just really inspiring for me as well.
There was one more I remember caught up with. She was talking about practicing. And this resonated because he was an athlete that practices, but she's like talking about your life. You just practice your life well or not. You're practicing well today or you're not, because you deserve to do your practices well. And so she's like, it's just like football practice, but it's your life practice. Whatever you're doing today, do it well. So we're podcasting today, do it well. And so she's like, you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, but practice it doing it well because you'll get better.
Right.
And so you just think of it for those guys that are athletes, because one of the questions, as we heard, was, what do you do after football? And Johnny's like, everybody's going to end at football.
Right.
Football's not a lifetime event for people. There's going to be life after football. Even the best of the best, like Brady, is done at 40.
Right.
You have half of your life beyond football. So you've got to, people as children should be thinking, if you're out there coaching kids, you want them to be a great Simone Biles at the Olympics.
Right.
But Simone, she's going to be done soon. She's in her late 20s. What is she going to be after a gymnast? Then there's going to be life after gymnastics, after the Olympics for all of those young people. And how are we helping them do that? You don't want the pinnacle of your life to be in your 20s and 30s, and then you never accomplish anything afterwards. So the life coach is really thinking, okay, how do you do what you're going to do best?
No one ever taught me how to transition.
No.
How to transition from different phases in my life, different phases in my career. No one talks to you about that. And, I think that's worth more conversation. It comes down to our personal motto. And I loved one of the questions that came from the audience was, Johnny, what's your personal motto? And I really love what he said. He kind of thought about it for a minute. And he goes, it's keep going, never quit.
That's right.
Right. It's so simple. But
how he had that tattooed on him.
He did. He has his tattooed. I think he has tattooed on his arm. So every time he forgets, he looks down and it says, keep going, never quit. And I think, isn't that a great motto for all of us to live by? That there's going to be tough days. There's going to be times that we're down and out. There's going to be times that things keep overwhelming. But guess what? Just keep going. Never quit. Right. It's going to get us a long way.
I'm telling you, this was worth the trip just for this one conversation.
It was.
I learned so much just in watching that entire episode. I was really grateful that I'd be here to watch his kind of kick off to his next journey.
Well, to be here in person, see Johnny in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which really started his entire career, kind of a historical moment. And so, not to overdo it, but it's just, I'm grateful to have these opportunities to be at places like this, to get to visit places and see and meet amazing people along the way.
Agreed. So today's Recovering Politician Policy is about journaling. Did you know that Johnny journals?
It changed everything. It changed my perspective on journaling when I heard Johnny saying, every morning I get up, I journal. And I said, what?
I know. So I'm a journaler.
Right.
I'm a little off this summer, but I do journal. But I don't journal Johnny's way. What's fascinating for me about Johnny, and this is because he's figured out he has a mood disorder, he's journaling about his good days and his bad days. And then he goes back to look, how many good days did I have in a month and how many not so great days do I have in a month? And now he's gotten to a point where he still gets up and goes each day, even if he's having an off day, but he wants to keep track because he tells you his mind lies to him. Right. And will tell him he's had more bad days than good, because that's how your brain works. So he's using journaling to go back to prove I actually had more good days than bad.
He's looking at the stats because he knows how to look at the stats, and the stats don't lie. And if the stats tell you you're having more good days than bad days, then that's hopeful. We all need to look at our stats more.
Oh my gosh, so great. And we think about it from my journaling perspective, thinking about, tracking the things you're grateful for, if you can think of those every day, or, thinking about your wins. Some people track what the wins were for the day. And the reason those things are important is exactly that. You're tracking the stats of the good, because we don't remember those. Naturally, we're going to remember maybe getting stuck in traffic, or your bagel was burnt, or whatever, your breakfast you ordered didn't come correctly. That sticks longer in our brains. Our brains naturally remember the negative. And so by tracking and keep looking and writing stuff down, you can go back and say, you know what, this time last year, I'm doing better this year than last year. I'm more positive this year than last year, or whatever it is. I just thought it was fascinating. And so now you were saying you might be able to talk to some men and some of your farmers that swear they're never
I
ever going
know.
to journal.
I know. It's going to be a new example I give when I do the farmer talks. I think that journaling is an option, right? And so we should always think about journaling. People are waving at us as we walk by in our radio room here, Renee.
I know we've got ourselves into the business room this morning, and people that were in our group yesterday, we taught about 80 people yesterday.
Yeah, standing room only in our breakout.
Yeah, so they're coming by waving at us as we are podcasting. We told them we podcasted, so now they're coming by going, "Oh my gosh, there they are, really podcasting."
Right.
Well, that was our talk for this time. We're going to come back to you in a minute about the next one regarding the conference itself, because we learned a whole lot more.
We did learn a whole lot.
And talk more about that. But today we just want to talk about the weight of great. Johnny Manziel. I'm telling you, if you get a chance to go out and see this, you need to. I mean, his untold story on Netflix. Gosh, what a mess he created in his life. And he's doing what he can now to make it different and to try to educate young people on just making different and better choices. And I find that amazing. So hope you enjoyed our show. We'll see you the next time.